The AllStar MMA live show back. The number one show in Asia, the number one UFC post-fight show in Asia, taking over Australia, New Zealand. We're almost there at the top. Today I'm joined by two of my friends, the industry friends, right? That's what people like to say, industry friends.
That's it.
Craig, we've known each other for a long time. He does the Fight Nights pick show with his brother. Shout out to his brother, Matt, right? Matt does a good job as well. Chris, we've been working together for a long time, and yeah, man, I'm excited to have you guys on. I'm excited to switch up this show, the format of the show. Usually I would have fighters on to break down what happens at these shows, but I think with these Apex events, it's better to get you guys on. People like you, people like Chris, to talk about these fighters, these matchups. And first off, man, these Apex shows, I think they're watered down. Is it fair to say they're becoming watered down? Has the UFC product become watered down? Has WME created a watered down version of the UFC that, remember back in the Zuffa days, it wasn't like that. Every UFC was solid. Craig, let's start with you, man. You've been watching this sport for a long time and dissecting stuff. Do you feel like
thanks
it's
for
watered
having
down?
me.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you. The way that you framed it, if you look at this card, even if you had Lewis and Spivak, consider that as a fight that was actually on this card. Both of those guys ranked in the top 15. Kind of coming into Sunday, we made our videos. Who else was ranked on the card? Just Jennifer Maia. And then all of a sudden, Marina Morose's win over Agapova kind of earned her that spot in the rankings. Now, Jillian Robertson finished Agapova very soundly after she didn't get ranked. So I always kind of have a weird kind of, inquisitive look at those rankings. But regardless, if you had the main event, you just had Maia and Morose who are ranked that were on this card. And, that lends a little bit of credibility as to how competitive some of the fights are going to be. And if you do consider it outside of that, I mean, I was excited about a lot of these matchups. You had a couple of different LFA champs on the card, Demopoulos, Johnson. You had some juice, but when it really does come down to it, when you factor in Dana White's Contender Series, when you factor in a lot of these fighters that if it's ever revealed what they're paid, if they ever fight in California or a few other jurisdictions, there's a lot of fighters on those 10 and 10, 12 and 12 contracts coming up. So it really is kind of becoming, a little bit watered down. Of course, once you lose that main event, it really leaves itself open to getting picked apart.
To be fair, though, there was a few fights that were originally scheduled for this card, solid matchups that were canceled. You had Cody Brundage versus Rodolfo Vieira. Of course, the main event, Lewis versus Spivak. Even William Knight was supposed to be on this card, and that matchup was, yes.
Do you have an answer to that one? Because the fight was still on Tapology last weekend, and then it was Monday? No, it would have been Sunday, I think, that they put out the official UFC email. And I checked it, and Knight wasn't on the card. That fight against Grecian wasn't on the card. Or not Grecian, rather. That fight that he was supposed to have against Prachnio. Yeah, exactly. It wasn't on the card, and then there was nothing said about it, and then all of a sudden it was off.
Yeah, I haven't even seen anything on socials or anything about it. I'll just check his Instagram real quick. But
yeah, Knight's still kind of posting
really
his strength and conditioning stuff.
Yeah,
it's kind of weird.
So it might not be on my side, right? It might be on Marcin's side. Who knows, man? Marcin he's kind of a mystery, right? He doesn't really stay too active on social media, so we don't know what's going on with him. But even Jack Shore versus Kyla Phillips, that was a solid matchup. But Jack Shore got injured. He had a knee injury. Man, that fight was on the card for a long time, even though we knew that Jack Shore wasn't on this card. Man, if those fights stayed on the main card, I think it's still a solid card, right? If you know about the sport. If you don't know about, if you don't follow it closely, you would just think it's watered down. And I think that's what's happening, right? These fights, where do they play these fights in the States? On ESPN, right? It's still on paid. Is there a paywall for these Apex cards?
like in Canada, it was on Fight Pass, so you had to pay for that, right? But the
Yeah,
whole
so
thing was on
still,
Fight Pass.
so
You
it's still on
generally get it on
a
TSN though, right?
Not this one. Like I did check
No.
UFC Canada's Twitter, and they had
Yeah,
Fight Pass, Fight Pass. It's really rare that they do that. Plus, like there were a few like not see you later, but a few like little brief commercial breaks that were on Fight Pass. But apart from that, it was just zip all the way through the fights.
Mm-hmm.
that's I don't know, man. I feel like these cards, they need to be free. They need to make these fights for free, at least in the US, right? That's the main market for them. You know, I don't know what's going on in Russia or in all these other countries. I'm pretty sure a lot of these countries are showing the fights, especially the Apex cards, probably on free TV, right? Because the deals that they make in Korea, like where I live, they used to be like a few years back, every event was free, pay-per-views, Apex cards, it didn't matter, it was free. And then slowly it got behind a paywall, so then you have to pay a monthly fee to get all the events, and that's what it has turned into, right? And then now, which sucks really, donkey balls, is that I have to pay for these UFC events, but I don't get the prelims. I only get the main cards. It's like, why would you just show the main card? Why don't you show the whole thing? Like, I don't understand that. I don't understand the logic behind it. I have no idea why they do that, and I complain to them. They used to have even like the commentary, like you could get the Korean commentary and then you could get the US commentary. But now you don't even get the US commentary. You just get the Korean commentary. And even they switch it over. Yeah, it's weird. And then they switched it over to another outlet. Like it's I think it's like CJ, some big conglomerate, right? That they own channels and stuff. And now they blur out. Like I didn't even notice it until last week during the Chandler versus Poirier fight. When there's too much blood, they turn the screen black and white now, which is, we're not kids.
What?
We pay for this. Like, what are you doing? I don't understand. Like, and it was during the live broadcast. It wasn't even like a replay of the show. So I don't know, man.
That blows my mind. That's funny, man. Like for Korea, like the capital of horror movies and gore movies, for them to turn the screen black and white when there's a bit of blood on there.
Yeah, I don't understand it. Like, that's why like the local promotions don't have elbows. They don't allow elbows.
Yeah,
like, they don't allow elbows because they want less cuts. They want less blood because they want to show it to the regular people. It's like, we pay for it, so the regular people don't watch this. Like, we want the blood.
Fair.
We want the guts.
It's good to know the PFL is doing well in Korea.
Yeah, PFL is doing really well. You know, it's all that YouTube money, right? We know about that YouTube money. Before we get into breaking down the card, make sure you guys go in the descriptions and download the AllStar app. Go to Fight Night Picks and subscribe to their channel. And yeah, man, let's go into this main event, which was Kennedy. I don't want to say his last name because I will butcher it, versus Ion Cutelaba, right? Ion Cutelaba, they look like two different weight classes, right? Like, this Kennedy guy is a massive, massive individual. Chris, what did you think going into the fight? Like, what did you expect out of this matchup?
Man, I was actually leaning Cutelaba, to be honest with you. I was high on him for a little while, but this fight has really turned me off him. He had, just call him Kennedy, eh? He had Kennedy rocked in that first round and decided, nah, it's time to go in for a takedown. And it's like, that's not the IQ you need to be having at this level of the sport. And especially like continuing to go back to it and copping the knees. And Kennedy was just reading it perfectly, and he got him a few good times. And it's just, yeah, I'm disappointed in Cutelaba's performance, but stoked for Kennedy. That was a good statement win for him in a tough spot, getting thrown into the main event like that, right?
For sure. And you know, Cutelaba, has he underperformed in your eyes, Craig, in his last couple of fights?
Yeah, like he's about to say. Like, I mean, let's go through it. Lost to Ankalaev. Was he out? Wasn't he out? Yeah, he was. Lost to Ankalaev. He was definitely out. 10-8 first round Jacoby. Loses the second. Loses the third. Has no cardio left. Beats Devin Clark. Had cardio and wrestling. Loses to Ryan Spann. Loses to Walker. Loses to Nshukwu. So if you look at it, that's what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 losses, a win, and a draw. And I mean, this is a guy that was finishing guys consistently in the first round. And I'm sure, as it was mentioned, you know, you question the fight IQ a little bit. Like, he rocks Kennedy with a couple great shots, and then he reaches in for the clinch, for the takedown. Like, what, you've got the guy hurt. Now, I'm assuming that Extreme Couture kind of coupled up before the fight or during the, you know, the camp for this fight and said, listen, you get yourself caught against Ryan Spann because you were going balls to the wall. You get yourself caught against Johnny Walker because you went way too hard and you burned way too quick. Against Kennedy, slow it down. Let yourself kind of just dictate the pace. If you want to clinch with him, you can beat him in that aspect. He was in full mount at one point. Couldn't really get anything done with it. So for me, with Cutelaba, he's lost his last 3 fights in a row, all finished before the end of the second round. Two of them in the first, one of them in the second. Like, I think it's regroup, and I don't even think it's regroup. It could be PFL, but I don't even think it's a Bellator. Like, maybe he just goes off into an organization you've never heard of before, wins some regional belt that means absolutely nothing, and then he ends up back like on a contender series spot. Because I think another fight against the guy who's halfway high level and competent, he could really struggle in it.
His wins are confusing to me because he had that crazy performance against Khalil Roundtree, and then he goes against Devin Clark, which is a completely different style, right? And Devin Clark is a hard fight for anybody, right? Because he's not really a guy that's good at one spot, but he can pretty much fight anywhere, right? And he goes in there and wins a decision against Devin Clark, but then he loses to some killers though, right? Ryan Spann, Johnny Walker. These guys are guys that will go in there and strike with Cutelaba. So maybe Cutelaba was doing what he was supposed to do, right, in this fight, but he gassed himself out. Do you think he gassed himself out? Because he looked like he was pretty tired in the second round. Like, at this level, how are you gassing yourself out in the first round? Like, do you not have a strength and conditioning coach?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to say. Especially being at Extreme Couture, you know, that's something that they put a lot of emphasis on, and he's been there for a little while.
And the PI.
You'd think, yeah, right. So it's disheartening to see, man. It's not a good look for his career at this point.
And then he goes to a split draw against Dustin Jacoby as well. Jacoby. Yeah, and Dustin Jacoby's it was a fun fight. It's just, and he didn't really gas in that one, right? He went balls to the wall in that one. I don't understand how he just gasses in this one. It confuses me. It's like,
I think he did gas in that one. I think towards
he gassed. Like, he went really hard, almost got the finish in the first round. Like, it was a 10-8, and then round 2, round 3, he had nothing left, and he just got kind of picked apart.
And that's
so Jacoby won that fight in your guys' eyes.
Yeah.
I thought so. Yeah.
The apex judging has never been something we applauded, right? The last couple of years. I don't know why the apex is even like your fellow Canadian Tanner Bozer, right? He complains like hell about the judging.
Yeah, well, he couldn't complain his last time out, but yeah.
No, it hasn't been good. Yeah, if you look at his record, he has fought, like, Cutelaba has fought some killers though, right? He has like Jared Cannonier, Serkinov. Man, he's been in the UFC for a while, but this recent run, he's lost 3 in a row and has been finished all 3 times. Not a good look, man. It doesn't seem like he's getting better at what he does, right? It seems like he can't even find the style that he wants to fight in. But I think the main thing about him is he needs to fix the gas tank. You know what I mean? Because he's an exciting fighter. We love to watch him fight. It's just he just can't last, right? I don't know, man. I don't know what's going on. You know, like, we know that we never know what's really going on in these guys' camps, right? And for real, like, I want to know, like, what's going on in Cutelaba. Like, is he undecided? Does he even really have a head coach? Who's his head coach? Like, who really is his head coach, right? He could go to Extreme Couture, but does he actually have a head coach that controls what's going on in his camp?
Wow, it's kind of like Nikolai out of Romania. I mean, same camp, same team, same basis. I mean, look at Nikolai outside of the UFC. He's this power pressure grappler that finishes guys on the ground. He comes into the UFC and he's a squared up boxer. So I don't really know. You know, Couture is a great gym. We know this. And I picked Cutelaba to win pre-fight. I thought, okay, we'll get that grappling. We'll get him in tight in the pocket. Kennedy thrives at having distance, throwing his kicks and landing, zip at the end of his shots. Kutalaba was able to do that really early on. The tank didn't last. For Nikolai, getting away from kind of what got him to the dance, walking guys forward and, you know, trying to pummel them. I mean, it works when you're fighting guys like Ike Villanueva. It doesn't really work as well when you're fighting guys that are higher up the chain. So for both of those guys, I don't know what the secret sauce is. Maybe it's you go to AKA and you try and kind of work that tank, work that wrestling. Maybe it's going to ATT and kind of getting that higher level skill opponent, or even Killcliff to get the skill check. But for both of those guys, I really question what's next, because they've both fallen off a cliff like hard lately.
Mm-hmm.
With those major camps as well, I don't know if that's always the answer, because it's like a sink or swim type of situation there, right? There's not enough coaches for all the fighters, and it seems like all the coaches are away every weekend at shows. So how are you getting that type of attention that you need, right? It takes a certain type of individual to be able to go to those camps if you haven't been there for a long time. Now, when you flip it to Kennedy's side, man, he's won 2 in a row, 2 finishes. His only losses are to Paul Craig. Not a bad, he got submitted by Paul Craig. Talon Jung, he got knocked out in the first round, and then a split decision lost to Nurgaman. No, I can't say his last name either. But what do you guys think of him? I think he's on a solid streak, right? Like back-to-back finishes. He looks pretty good. He's very awkward. And I think that gives a lot of fighters trouble, right? And then his size, his reach. He's only getting better too, right? So I think that they should match him up with another guy that he can build his skill set off of. Not somebody that's like, another Kutalaba. I think who's another Kutalaba in the division that he can fight? Because I feel like he can develop. What do you think, Chris?
Chris, there's a guy that's 12-4 that just lost recently.
I lose you guys? I don't know what's happening.
What happened?
Am I still here?
Yeah.
Oh,
Technical
cool.
difficulties.
You've all frozen on my screen. I wasn't sure what was going on.
Who do you think is good for
so
Kennedy?
We're talking about for Kennedy. Look, Paul Craig could be interesting. You know what I mean? I think that would be fun to sort of see where he's at on the ground. I've got no stats or anything coming up on my screen at the moment, so I can't really make any judgments. I do think Paul Craig would be fun, depending on how Jimmy Crute goes in Perth. I think that could be a fun one as well. But yeah, there's someone to really test the grappling. I think would be where he needs to go next.
Who did you pick in this fight, Craig?
Wow, not the winning fighter.
And why did you decide to go with Kutalaba?
I thought Kutalaba was going to have that grappling advantage. And I mean, we saw like Danilo Marquez have it in his fight against Kennedy until he gassed as well. So I figured that was going to be it. Again, closing the distance. But like you said, like if you want to match him up against a guy who's really going to test the wrestling, the grappling, another guy similar to Nikolai that hasn't really done it in the UFC, but he's got hands and he's quick, would probably be a guy whose nickname I hate, the Professional, Azamat Murzakanov. Like a guy like that, or then you're really going up. Like I wouldn't say Dominic Reyes. I think Reyes is going to be out for a while. And I wouldn't say like Santos, because I don't think Thiago Santos is going to take that fight. But maybe Murzakanov would be game with taking that one.
Let's talk about Dominic Reyes, right? Like he's a guy that has fallen off a cliff. Let's just be real with it, right? He would be a perfect fight for some of these guys in the division that are on streaks, that haven't fought a ranked opponent. And, he needs to get back on the winning track, right? Dominic Reyes. If he loses to, like, let's say you put against like a Kennedy, right? And then he loses to Kennedy, man, it's hard to like support him continuing, right? In that division. Like he needs to find something or step away for a while and train and find that fire again, right? What did you think of Reyes last week, Craig? It was violent.
Like I think he did what you just said he should do, and it didn't work. So I don't know what would work. Like he took the time away. He went all the way across the country, trained at Glover Teixeira's gym, and then just the bottom fell out again. So that's what, 4 losses in a row. and he's been getting finished lately. So yeah, to me, yeah, Reyes is between a rock and a hard place, and maybe it's time to call it, maybe it's not. I was kind of surprised that he didn't decide to hang up the gloves.
I don't think he should hang up the gloves, but I think maybe he could go to the PFL. PFL is always a good option. You know, I
mean, look at Omari Akhmedov.
Yeah, like it's always a good option. Like there's guys going over there and doing really well for themselves, right? Look at Mateus Bufa. He lost in the Contender Series. And now he's fighting for $1 million next weekend.
Yeah, I mean against almost UFC fighter Anche Della.
Exactly. Almost, right? Both of them almost.
Yeah.
So it's not a bad option, right? CLOUDBET could be on his way. He could be on his way, right? Over there.
I mean, we've like in 2 days, think about it. Like you got Kutsalov on a losing streak. You got, like you said, Dominic Reyes on a losing streak. You got fighters on this card that have lost brutally. Last night, my guy, Bibby, loses. Kevin Bellion loses. Like it's just the turnover's crazy right now in MMA.
And the, you know, going back to what we talked about earlier today in the show about, you know, the UFC Apex cards being watered down. The reason why is like the UFC is pushing all these Contender Series fighters like really, really quickly into the UFC on like little experience, right? Like less than 10 fights, and putting them on these Apex shows, and kind of like cutting off the top, cutting off the fat, so to say, getting rid of these large and bloated contracts they feel like are not worth it anymore. And then you're seeing them guys move over, right? Or not re-signing. You know what I mean? Maybe, you know, it's like kind of like the whole situation with Shane Burgos, right? Like they looked at him and they said, okay, let's see you fight out your contract and see what you do. And maybe they didn't want to let him go, but he was just like, hey, he called the bluff, right? He called the bluff and he got paid.
Hopefully he got paid, yeah. Yeah.
Hopefully. Yeah, hopefully. The co-main event, you got Waldo Cortez Acosta on short notice facing Chase Sherman, right? Waldo, this guy is a problem. I think he's pretty good. No?
Well, I mean, it's another walking L. Like I got the last 3 fights wrong, and in this one, I thought, okay, Chase Sherman. If you look at the numbers, he lose to Parker Porter, but he had really good leg kicks. He, basically chopped down Ike Villanueva when he came back to the UFC from Island fights, and he hurt him really badly, and he had a giant welt on the lead of his shin. Did Villanueva, and then Sherman was able to box and. He mixed up the leg kicks a bit in the first round. Some people thought Sherman won the first. I thought Cortez Acosta won. Second round was definitely Cortez Acosta. Third round, Cortez Acosta. So, I mean, you look at the way that the rounds went, and Cortez Acosta was able to just continue to advance with his boxing, land quick combinations. He's pretty good from the outside. He throws that fastball of a right hand that they're always going to talk about. And for me, like, I was really high on Cortez Acosta on Dana White's Contender Series. I thought he was going to absolutely wreck Suzarchi, and he was a minus 360 favorite, so he's favored to wreck him. And he did, and he looked really good. And he's kind of had decent fights against lower-level heavyweights in the UFC. Like, Chase Sherman is 16-11 right now, and he's 4-10 in the UFC. So beating these guys and having close fights with them doesn't prove a whole heck of a lot. Like, when I look at, like, blue chip prospects, think of one that's outside of the ranks right now at heavyweight. You get Jailton Almeida out of Brazil. Looks completely unstoppable. He could win the title tomorrow. We don't know. And, he's booked in that fight against Abdurakhimov that comes up, it falls out, it comes up, it falls out. He's supposed to fight Grecian, it falls out. But when you look at a guy like Cortez Acosta, and I'm trying to project the ceiling on him, I threw the tweet out there right after the fight. Like, I think he could maybe beat Abdurakhimov, and if Blagoy decides to strike, then maybe Cortez Acosta can beat him. But I'm not completely sold on him. And I know, I sound like a guy who picked against Cortez Acosta in 2 fights in a row. Yes, I did. But when I just look at his skill set and I look at everybody else at the top of this division, is he Chris Daukaus? No. Like, is he Biggie Boy? No. So I have a really hard time when I'm trying to throw a ceiling at Cortez Acosta. He's undefeated. His boxing's great. His power's there, even if he hasn't had the finishes in the UFC. But I have a hard time trying to put him in a box right now.
Yeah, he is somewhat unproven, but I feel like these are the fights that he should be taking, to develop his skills, to get comfortable in that octagon, to test some things out, right? That he's been training, right? I think he needs that because, you know, pushing him into like these bigger fights right away, and they might do it his next fight. Who knows, right? He might step in. He seems like he wants to just continue fighting no matter who it is. I think he should just jump in on these short notice fights against this level of talent, the mid tier, right? Guys that are on losing streaks, guys that are, you know, like you said, 4-10 in the UFC, because we might not see the best of him yet because he only has 9 fights, right? He's only had 9 fights, 9 professional fights. So,
and like they talk about it too, like he has the boxing experience. That was the thing that kind of soured me on it. I went and watched this fight against Sonny Conto, and I threw the audio in our video. Like the announcer's like, this guy doesn't have any technical boxing experience. He's just an MMA fighter with the boxing gloves on. And he got absolutely destroyed. Like the jab of Conto, and then Conto like continues to set up his jab. Cortez Acosta brings both hands to this side to block the jab, and then Conto lands a right hand right here and drops him and puts him out. And that was last year. So to me, that really did leave a bad image in my head. But like, yeah, you look at this division, like, could he fight Arlovsky next? Could he fight 4-fight losing streak by TKO Augusto Sakai? Could he fight like Alir Latifi, who isn't he in the UFC? Don't fight with staff, you know, and don't talk about it. That's definitely a thing for poor Alir Latifi. But there's definitely fights out there. It's just, yeah, it's a weird thing. And I'm eager to see, you know, as far as odds wise, where's Cortez Acosta? Because I think they said he opened -160 and is -240 by fight night. I wonder where things start to even themselves out a little bit.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep my eye on him. I think he's an interesting prospect. I think he did really well. This fight was a weird fight because he was volume punching. He landed some solid shots right throughout the fight. You know, there were some real significant shots where Chase Sherman was hurt, but then he was like spamming him with like backhands and slaps. Did you notice that?
Yeah, and I like the other thing you got to look out for. Like, I know it's as a result of getting kicked. I wonder what he's like when he's in Southpaw, because he doesn't really do a whole lot when he's over in Southpaw. So it's going to be something that I'm eager to see. And he's not a guy that trains out of a super gym either. So, you know, eager to see what kind of adjustments they can make fight over fight.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep my eye on him, man. The WCA Waldo. There's not many guys named Waldo, so it's, you know, once a Waldo comes up on the UFC, you know, card, you know who it is. Yeah, so let's see what he does, man. I thought he did well. I expected Chase Sherman to do way better, right? Because, you know, I thought the last fight against Vandera, he came back after, you know, going to war, and he got the finish, and I felt like he built some momentum off of that. And I even interviewed him ahead of the Vandera, or was it no, the Parisian fight, right, which never happened, which was a couple weeks ago, and it seemed like he was in a better headspace. He had the right training around him, the right coaches, but he talked about getting into the flow, you know, and he just never got into the flow. It looked like it a little bit, but then Waldo was just too aggressive, right? It was just like the pressure was on Sherman, and he just couldn't get out of the funk. And yeah, and it just, Waldo was just that pressure, man. You know, the pressure that Waldo put on him, he just couldn't handle it.
No, and Sherman had a great first round. Like, I mean, it was close, but it was good in his part because he was able to mix up the boxing, mix in the takedown at the end of the round, mix in his leg kicks. And then in the second round, he just kind of did a whole lot of nothing. Like, he was on the outside. He wasn't landing shots. Then he really ate a ton of shots. And in the third round, he's starting to rally back a little bit until Waldo took over. So for Sherman, I have no idea what's next. I mean, you know, you kind of touched on it. Like, he wanted to be out of the UFC so he could pursue bare knuckle. And then he signed right back in a fight that he was destined to lose against Romanov. And now we're here. So I don't know. I don't know. It's kind of weird.
He's in a weird situation. The UFC, you know, I never want guys to get cut. You know, man, I never want guys to, like, I'm not the type of person who will be saying, like, you should retire. But, man, he just hasn't found anything, and he's fought in the UFC. This is his second run. You know, it's not like he's doing a Julian Erosa. Look at that guy. He's on his second run, just killing it right now, right? Just phenomenal. chase. He just hasn't found that flow that he's chasing, so to say. The next fight was a good one, man. It was a really, really solid welterweight matchup between Muslim Salikov and Andre Fiallo. Man, these guys were hitting each other with some heaters, and the style that Andre brings, man, it's exciting, but it's so dangerous, right? Like he puts himself in danger, and he felt it against Muslim. Mixing the takedowns, like what? Did you
And he
expect
did that against Li Jingliang, and he started it like as he's aged, and Trinaldo fight a little, but like Salikov first round super explosive, super dangerous. Second round kind of slows down, wrestles a little bit more. Third round is what it is, and like in this fight, it gets better for me. Trust me, folks. But I got this one wrong too. And when you watch Fiallo, like he struggled with Chris Curtis in the takedowns. He struggled against who was it? Was it Glyco Franca? No. Was that who he fought on PFL? And he lost by whatever they call it, like a draw, and he didn't move forward. Yeah, Glyco Franca struggled with the takedowns in that fight. Antonio Dos Santos struggled with the threat of the takedown. Like Fiallo's biggest threat the biggest threat to his game is the takedown. And if you're really, really heavy on it, he can kind of lose himself in it. And he had that great first round. He hurt Salikov. Salikov's pawn at his eye. And then for Fiallo, just like Sherman in the second round, like, did Killcliff FC just whisper in your ear, just take the second round off? You don't need the second round. Because for both of them, they struggled in the second. And for Fiallo, yeah, he never got himself back into it. Credit Salikov. Like, Salikov is aggressive. He worked the takedowns. And we kind of touched on it before the fights. Like, Salikov had, 4 spinning knockout wins in a row coming into the UFC. And we all know the last one. Just like Israel Adesanya beat Melvin Gillard. And then he gets it. And for Salikov, I don't know what's next. I thought, listen, the guy's 38. He's starting to lose a little bit of a step. He got finished more recently than Fiallo had, and nobody really seemed to want to talk about that. But the fight against Jingliang was about a month after Fiallo's fight against Jake Matthews. But for Fiallo, he's gotten away from one really key thing. He used to walk guys down and throw his left as a jab, a hook, and an uppercut. And now he just wants to seem to throw it as a hook to set up his right hand. And he's kind of gotten away from the mechanics that led him into the UFC. So it's weird for me to watch these Fiallo fights because it seems like he wants to get into a firefight, and he just, like, as soon as he starts to eat some shots, he backs off and his game's completely gone away.
It reminds me of someone from last week is Sting, Sung Choi. Like, he kind of fights, I don't know, he fought more technically before he got to the UFC than he in the UFC. It seems like he's just fallen in love with brawling.
I became this giant Sung Woo Choi fan. Like the Caceres fight, I thought he would win. I thought he was going to go in this illustrious. I thought he was definitely going to beat Josh Kulibao. And all of a sudden, he gets into the brawl and he just completely throws it. Like, I'm a wrestler now. You have good wrestling, but you're not. I've never seen you as this top tier wrestler. So Choi, it's a shame, you know. And for him, it's the same thing as a guy like Iwan Kutsalaban. You might be able to shed more light on this, but like, does he go to the regional scene and pick up some wins? Does he end up on Contender Series, or does he just continue to fight like these up and comers?
Choi's sitting at 30 years old, right? So if he goes to the regional scene and decides to go fight there, he's risking a lot, right? Because if he goes and loses, then he's never going to get back to the dance. Because I feel like when you get like leave the UFC, it's hard for you to get back into the UFC as a foreign fighter. I just feel that way. Like a guy that's fighting not in the US. Because why? You're gonna have to step in on short notice to get your second shot, right? So
like,
I don't know.
I'm trying to think. There's 2 Canadians I can think of that keep taking fights, and I'm gonna look up their records. Like Shane Campbell's one of those guys. Like he's 34 now, and he's won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fights in a row. And his last win was over Kyle Prepelec, that was also in the UFC. And he's got a fight coming up against Alex White, you know, the Spartan that was in the UFC. Like if he continues to win fights, but yeah, they're not in the States. So I don't know. Maybe he'll just never end up back in the UFC. But like Choi, I thought he had every single tool in his tool belt, and he was going to go out there and continue to win. And then the Kulibao fight, Caceres fight turned me off him so much that we actually both on the channel went with Trezano to get the win.
Yeah, and you guys were right. Like he got hit, and the double knockdown from that point
Yeah.
on, he just became the old Choi of that we remembered in the last couple of fights. With Fialho, I kind of feel like he's man, he's exciting to watch. It's just he's just not making the smart decisions, right? And with Salikov, mixing in those takedowns just opened up the striking for him, and it led to the third round finish, right? Did you pick Salikov for this?
No, I had Fialho, who was the underdog at the start of the week, and then I think right before the fight he might have been like a slight favorite. It was close, but I was surprised that Fialho was such an underdog, just based on that. Like, if you can walk down Salikov and take his kicking distance out of it, he's got really good short shots when you try and come in, like Trinaldo found out. But for me, I thought Fialho, using those 3 different versions of a left hand to cut it, that was going to do enough, and then he was going to be able to get his work going. But he's completely gone away from that. So he's another one of those guys. I was really high on him coming into the UFC, just kind of knowing what I had seen with Bellator, going back on the tape, because it's not like after he left Bellator, it wasn't like I was just finger on the pulse Fialho. But going back and getting ready for his UFC debut against Pereira, like, I was super excited. And then just getting rocked by Cameron Van Camp, losing to Jake Matthews, and again, the game plan completely went out the window in that fight. And then losing to Salikov, like, I put it like he needs a long vacation. Like a really long one.
Yeah, I felt like, I was in Singapore and I thought Fialho was going to win that fight against Jake Matthews. I felt like Fialho was going to be able to go in there and utilize a good game plan, a good striking strategy against Jake Matthews. And Fialho said in the pre-fight interviews ahead of this fight that he underestimated Jake Matthews. And that's, you can't do that in the UFC. You can't go in there and underestimate anybody, right? Because they're going to take your side. They're going to take your momentum. They're going to take everything from you, right? And that's what happened. And look what, now he's sitting on back-to-back losses, 2 finishes. Not a really good place to be, I mean, it's kind of like he's the opposite version of Jack Della. Let's move on to Jack Della, right? Jack Della is a guy that kind of has a similar style, but just much more intelligent inside that cage, right? With everything that he does. What is your impressions of him, man? 3 straight wins, 3 straight knockouts, first round.
Well, it sucks that we lost Chris, because I'm sure Chris is going to say, like, hey, he stuck with his original camp. He's still scrappy MMA out of Australia. And if you look at Jack Della, even when he gets into those firefights, and even when he gets hit, he doesn't get away from the game plan. And he'll switch stances. He'll throw that lead hook, switch stance. Like, he uses left hand as 2 different shots. Like, if it's orthodox, it's a hook. And if he's southpaw, he throws it like straight down the pipe, and it lands every time. But the best part about Jack is that he'll rip to the body to come back up to the head and make the fighters think. And you saw Danny Roberts' first combo, first shots that started to land to his body, his hands came way down. And then he's eating it. And then he couldn't figure out where the fight was going to take place. And after that, Roberts continued to move his arms up and down. And then as soon as Della ripped to the body, then Roberts starts to crumple and he's able to get the finish. And that's 3 straight first round finishes. And again, Roberts fought a Meave, so you can play MMA math, but you beat poor Pete Rodriguez, Pistol Pete. You beat Ramazan Ameev, but the craziest part about it is you beat Ramazan Ameev after Ameev already uses his game plan. So you beat him that way, and then you beat Danny Roberts striking. And like, I know a lot of comparisons, like Mike Perry, I thought was pretty similar, build to a guy like Jack Della. They're pressure, they're both power punchers. And Danny Roberts, I was surprised that he couldn't kind of figure it out. Like, he tried some kicks, he tried this and that, but Roberts wasn't able to pull it out. Roberts wasn't able to kind of drag it into the deep waters. And I really like a guy like Danny Roberts. I was kind of surprised to see that he had the camp from the States with him in his corner, because the last time I checked his Instagram, he was in the UK getting ready for the fight. So it was kind of an interesting one there, but a lot of interesting camps, I guess, for some of the fighters on this card.
Yeah, Danny Roberts, man, I don't know where this puts him, because when he loses devastatingly, right, in a lot of his fights. And I tweeted out, if Roberts fights like he did against Mike Perry, it's going to be a short night. And that's what exactly happened, right? He got pressured against the cage, and like you said, he was just trying to cover up. He wasn't trying to move out the way. He was just trying to cover up and try to block punches with his arms and his fists. and his gloves, and that never works against Jack Della. Jack Della, I've known Jack for years now, right? Like I've been interviewing him for so long. He was the eternal champion for like years and years, and he would fight anybody. Pretty much like nobody wanted to fight him. Whoever came, he would just fight them. And he was the title holder, right? Like that's very rare on the regional scene, right? Where a guy is holding a title and not many dudes want to fight them. But he's sitting in Australia, so it's not like he's getting the attention that he should.
You watch Jack's fight on the regional scene, or his fights on the regional scene. You watch his fight against Anders Lusa. It's really hard to beat Jack. Like the only way you're going to beat him is if you completely out wrestle him. Like you'd have to be a really high level wrestler. Or if you're a guy that has such intense speed that you can throw straight shots and get out of the pocket really quick and then get yourself back in. Like it's really hard to beat a guy like that. So for Roberts, yeah, I mean, he kind of seemed destined to fail. You saw the line that they showed in front of the fight. Della was like a minus 660 favorite. So I know Fight Ghost threw it out there, and I don't know if Fight Ghost is watching Fight Night picks, but I said, like, it always feels silly to me when somebody's like a minus 700 favorite and you just go, you know what? Let's throw down that chalk. Why not? That makes a lot of sense for me, because I've seen fights where, you know, you have some massive favorite and they lose and everybody's kind of sour about it after the fact. But Della does seem like the real deal. And I know Matt on our channel talks about Della as he does with like the same kind of reverence as a guy like Rachmanov or like people did with Chimaev. Is he still chopped liver? Do people still dislike Chimaev at this point?
I don't think so. I think he's not chopped liver. Nah.
They just forgot about the pay-per-view and the weight and stuff. But yeah, I think Della's like, it's got to be a rank guy next. And like you look at the 15-14, it's Rodriguez and then Pereira. So maybe somebody of that caliber next.
I would put Jack as the favorite against both those guys. You know, he might not have the experience as a D-Rod or a Pereira, but the Pereira fight would be interesting. I think that would be much more fun to watch, to see how he deals with that wild style, especially with the kicks and the speed. Like you said, you need somebody with speed. Pereira has the speed. He just doesn't have the gas tank. That's the problem. And I think like in that fight, let's say they put it together, I think Jack weathers the storm and then he actually goes out of the first round and has to, you know, get the finish in the second or third. But, you know, with these guys in the welterweight division, Pereira is a massive welterweight too, you know what I mean? And if he catches him, you never know. I would like to see Jack get rocked. You know, I would like to see him get tested as well, right? Like that. Those are the things you want to see when they enter that top 15. See how they deal with, you know, the adversity, right? Like you want to see that. And Jack has dealt with adversity, right? He's lost 2 fights, you know, in the regional.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's 2-0 in those rematches that he had. So yeah.
Yeah. He's a guy that chases back his losses. But yeah, with Jack, he wants to, like I talked to him, he wants to, if he can get Sean Brady, and he's chasing after a grappler, which is interesting to me, right? He wants to fight a grappler in the top 15. Most guys wouldn't do that. They would want to, you know, jump in against another striker. Because man, Jack's boxing he might be one of the best boxers in MMA.
And that's like, you know, Clash of Styles with Sean Brady is what it is. You can't take a fight against Jack Della with 1 foot in, 1 foot out, like Brady kind of sounded after his fight against Muhammad. Yeah, like that a guy might say something like that, you know, like undefeated amateur, undefeated pro, never really faced much adversity. And then the first time you lose, you get finished fairly brutally by Bilal Muhammad, who's not necessarily known as a big time finisher. So not that was completely unexpected, but yeah, you go into a fight with Jack Della with that kind of attitude or even some of those lingering thoughts, and you're going to have a really rough night out.
Yeah, Jack Della, he's a problem. He's like, to be honest, he's going to be like a Volkanovski. He's going to skyrocket into that top 10, then the top 5, and he's going to be contending right against some of those big names, you know, and that there's some interesting matchups up there. You know, we don't want to jump too far because he's not even in the top 15 yet, but yeah, he's got a lot of hype, even though he's not a guy that is a big talker. You know, he just goes in there.
Like, you actually had something really interesting on this card. Who is the most polite, well-spoken person on this card? Is it Jack Della or is it Kennedy and Shekwu?
That's hard to say. Both those guys are nice guys on the mic, right? And but yeah, Jack Della, man, He's of course you need to watch for him. You have to watch for him, and he comes from a small camp as well. It doesn't Ben Vickers is his head coach. Shout out to Ben, and his training partners are like Jack Becker. Jack Becker was a guy that was probably going to get signed if he won his next fight, but then broke his leg off a kick. But yeah, they're a small camp out in Perth, but they got some solid fighters. Most likely, there's going to be a few of those guys getting signed real soon to the UFC, probably on that Perth card. The next fight, Charles Johnson versus Zhalgas Zhumagulov. That was a very close fight. I feel like when I was done with watching the fight, it's like Zhumagulov started really well, very active on the feet, mixed in the wrestling, the grappling really well, won the first round. Second round, I kind of was leaning towards Zhumagulov winning that second round, but Charles Johnson ended that fight like with the gas to the metal or gas to the pedal, right? It was just, or the foot on the pedal. Let's just say it like that. What was he doing with the stomps? Like, was his knee jacked up?
Yeah, like I noticed that, what was it, second round, he threw a kick and he kind of came back on it. And then he looked like he was trying to work it out and he kept fighting and he was having a lot of success with the knees and the kicks to the body. And then he started to kind of feel it out. And then, as the fight continued, he started like stomping on it aggressively. And it was his back leg, but he still was able to switch his stances so quick that Zhumagulov couldn't take advantage of it. But do you know, like, Zhumagulov must be a Ruby Sports fighter, is he not? Because most managers wouldn't go that hard on Twitter, kind of campaigning that you should have won your fight.
Yeah, he's definitely a Ruby guy. Zhumagulov, man, he's had a rough run in the UFC. He's 1-5. He's on a 3-fight losing streak. A lot of people felt like he won the Maddalena fight. I think it's just the Maddalena fight, right? Like, what was the Albazi fight really close? Was the Alba fight real close?
I'm on MMA Decisions, and it's 16-4 the thought that Zhumagulov won 29-28. So there was 3 that had it 29-28 Paiva, 1 had it 30-27 for Paiva. So that one was really close. The Albazi fight, Zhumagulov started out strong in the first round, lost the second and the third. Against Maddalena, it was a slight majority that had Zhumagulov. Actually, no, sorry. Everybody but one had Zhumagulov to beat Maddalena. One scored at 29-28. Judge Anthony Manus scored at 30-27 Maddalena. Now, I went back on my tweets before I did a preview prediction, and I said it's either 29-28 Zhumagulov or 30-27 Maddalena because it's that close of a fight. So it was a really close fight. And I might have that vice versa, but that's just to say, like, that was a really close fight. And I see it in your comments, or I saw it around the comments that the fight was really close, so on and so forth. So I thought he beat Maddalena. I thought he beat Paiva. I thought he beat Johnson too. And I thought he won the second round. And I know significant strikes aren't always everything. And the numbers aren't always everything. The judges don't always get to see the numbers. But the second round was really close. The first round, and then, you look at it at the end of the day, like, I definitely didn't think that Charles Johnson won that fight. And we know, like, Charles Johnson's a 5-round guy. Like, he thrives in 5 rounds with LFA. He comes back strong 3rd round, 4th round, 5th round. So credit to him to get his first UFC win. Like, I know Sean Bitter thought, like, in his pre-fight write-ups a while ago that Johnson was, like, a destined guy for the top 15. And he could be. But for Zhumagulov to lose these 2 really close fights in a row that most people thought that he won against Maddalena and Johnson, and then to retire, like, that's insane. Like, a guy's life is in the hands of the judges, and now he's going to become what? A guy? Not a fighter, just a guy? Like, it's sad.
And because of that, Zhumagulov has announced his retirement from the sport of mixed martial arts. But he gets to go back to his multiple wives, right? Like, he has a pretty good life outside of the sport.
You're telling me it sounds like more headaches if that's the case.
Exactly. Well, he probably thinks it's better for his lifestyle. But Charles Johnson, he started to find his groove in that 3rd round, and I think that's the Charles Johnson we need to see from round 1. If he could do that in round 1, round 2, round 3, he's a hard guy to beat.
Like he kind of like Cortez Costa. Cortez Costa in boxing 6-4. You wonder why he's an undefeated MMA fighter? It's because he's not a boxer. Charles Johnson in MMA 12-3. In boxing 1-5-4. You wonder why he's not doing boxing anymore? Like Johnson isn't a good boxer in MMA. He's not. He doesn't throw his hands very often. He's got a really speedy jab. It's his kicks, his knees, and his takedowns that win him fights as they go along. And when he's flowing, is he ever fast? And you know what? I shouldn't have said what I said, because in the third round, his boxing looked really good. He was throwing that left hook and like pawing it out there and kind of cutting it against Shumagulov. Johnson, like as he found, like you said, his rhythm and his confidence, he looked great. And he was kind of doing like a little bit of a shuffle, and he was looking off to the side and throwing his shots. I'm not, it doesn't matter who the fighter is. 5 seconds left of a really close fight, and you're going to stop fighting, put your hand out there, and like, hey, we're buds. Like, that's it. I don't know if that's the play. I know like commentary sometimes gets on guys and gals that do that. I didn't really love it, just where it was so close of a fight. But I think we learned a little bit more out of Charles Johnson. The guy's tough as nails. Like if his knee was really hurt, for him to kind of stomp out of it and win the third round, that's a big deal.
Maybe that's what the judges looked at to decide the victory, that he was stomping, he was claiming his territory in that cage, and he was just doing it over and over again. It's almost like what Benson Henderson used to do. I don't know if people remember this, but when Benson Henderson used to get dropped, he would like get up and then like he would like rub his feet into the mat like he slipped. So the judges would see it as like him slipping rather than him getting caught. Like he would, like those little nuances, right? Those little things can add up in the judges' eyes. I wish the judges can see the numbers, to be honest with you. I wish they could. But the numbers are never accurate, right? Because if you look at ESPN.com, it says they both landed 141 strikes total, both of them. They landed the same amount of strikes in that fight, which is pretty insane. And significant strikes, something that we have no idea what that even fucking means. Significant strikes. You know what I mean? We know where the strikes landed, but we have no idea if that's significant or not. We only see if it's visible, you know, if they're rocked, of course we can see that. But significant, I don't know, man. I don't even think we should have a thing called significant strikes.
One championship-wise, if you're scoring it, yeah, maybe Johnson won the fight, but I don't know. I thought Shumagulov got the win.
Yeah. Did you pick him, Zumagulov?
Pick Johnson, actually. Pick Johnson. There were two fights on the card that I'd scored not based on my picks, which, you know, full transparency. But, yeah, there were two really bad decisions on this card.
Yeah, there were some bad. Did you have any parlays for these events? This event?
I had Demopoulos, Jack Della, and Fialho. And that was the big nice one. That was like a plus 300 at the end of it. And I know I said that I don't usually take minus 700s in this and that, but Della seemed to me like the real deal. But yeah, I was feeling pretty good after the Demopoulos one, only for Fialho to lose.
In MMA, right? Betting, especially with parlays, do you ever go more than 3 fights?
Not really. Like you see folks in our chat, and there could be people that are playing along right now, and it's like, you know, why didn't you get this fight right? And I can kind of get an inkling as to why they're asking that question, the way that they're framing it. Or, geez, I was one leg away from my 9-fight parlay. No, I don't do them, because like we get asked every now and again, have you ever had a perfect card? I had one. Like I think it was last summer, and it was like an 11-fight card, and I got all 11 right. I'd like to think that I'm all right at doing this, or the channel will probably fold. But, you know, you're never going to get all of them right all the time. If we did, we wouldn't have a channel. I'd have my millions, and I'd be, you know, vacationing all over the world, and I wouldn't need to do it. So, yeah, I don't have like 8-9 fight parlays that win all the time.
Yeah. Well, someone was telling me that if you're betting on fights on the UFC or, you know, Bellator or whatever, you should probably never go past 3 fights, because your chances of winning is very low. If you do hit, it's a massive win, but will it make up all the other parlays that you've lost throughout the years? Maybe not. Who knows, right? But as a suggestion to the people that are betting out there, what would you say? Go past 2 fights, 3 fights?
Just don't do it. Enjoy the fights. The house usually wins.
By the way, Chris, he was with us earlier in the show for like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but I guess a huge storm had hit Australia, and his Wi-Fi and his internet went down, so he wasn't able to rejoin us, which sucks, right? It would have been great to have him to talk about these fights, but me and Craig, we pretty good at this. We all right. We know what we're doing. The other ranked fighter was on the prelims, right? I think she was the only ranked fighter, right?
Well, again, they gave Moreau. Listen, aren't you the one that's on the ranking committee here?
No, I'm not on the UFC ranking committee. I'm on the Bellator ranking committee.
I thought you were on the UFC ranking committee too.
No, Bellator.
Okay, that's why I took it really soft. Marina Moroz to be ranked, because when we made the video, Maya was ranked 8th, and then before the fight, Moroz is ranked 15th. How can you justify a fighter who's fought 3 times in 3 years and won those 3 fights to be a ranked fighter when you beat Maeda Buena Silva, you don't get a ranking. You beat Maria Gopova, who's nowhere near the rankings. You have no number next to your rankings. Jillian Robertson then goes out, completely chokes the life out of Agapova, one of the most disgusting submissions I've ever seen. And it's not because of the Canadian thing. Robertson doesn't get ranked, but then mysteriously Moroz has a number 15 next to her name coming into this fight. I don't trust the UFC rankings at all. And I think it was really silly that Moroz was ranked like just fight week. Hey, here's the top 15.
Maybe it was the Playboy effect. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, question. Do they still publish that magazine?
I have no idea. Who even looks at Playboy? Come on.
Both
with the internet age?
Tricky. Really tricky.
Yeah.
But like in the fight, yeah, I mean Maya was not looking good after the title fight, and she was lucky that she beat Jess Guy. But her boxing was much improved. Her aggression was there, which is something that we haven't really seen, because she just kind of like waits. And in this fight, she was aggressive. And Moroz didn't fool anybody with her ki eyes, or what are they called? It's not ki eye.
I have no idea what you're talking
Her
about.
traditional martial arts yells that she does.
Oh, yeah.
She didn't fool anybody there. And she likes to throw a ton of volume and doesn't really land a lot in terms of her accuracy. None of that worked for her. So I wasn't incredibly surprised that Maya won the fight, nor did I pick, Moroz to win in the circumstance. But for Maya, I have no idea what it means, because you beat somebody that's recently entered into the top 15 and you're number 8. So it doesn't really get much easier.
I thought Moroz, if she had a chance to beat Maya, it'd be on the ground, but Maya's really good on the ground as well. So it's like, who do you choose? You would definitely choose Maya, right? Because it would go to the feet, and then Maya does have a decent background in striking, a decent one, right? Compared to Moroz, not the best on the feet. And I felt like Maya is just much stronger, and she has more experience against high level competition. Like you said, Moroz is ranked for beating, mid-level fighters, which doesn't make any sense. And the UFC, the rankings don't matter. We all agree with that. It only matters when you're in there and you could use it to your advantage. And that's what fighters want. That the fighters, if you talk to them, they don't know how the rankings, are made. They just want to be there. They just push to be in the rankings so they could use that to their advantage. That's how the game works in the UFC. But Maya beating Moroz, it doesn't really do nothing for her. She just kind of establishes herself in the middle of the top 15, and that's about it.
Yeah. Yep.
And the next fight, Miles Johns, you really had a problem with this decision. Is this the fight?
Yeah. I don't really understand. Like, Miles Johns switches up his camp. He came in walking in, like, he took this fight November the 4th, so it was on short notice. Replaced Jose Johnson, walked in saying I'm the champion, and then in the first round he just didn't get out of like the first gear. He didn't really land much of substance until the end of the round. The second round was pretty darn close. Like, neither guy really did a whole heck of a lot with it. The third round was what it was. I thought Morales won the fight. But for a judge to score 30-27 Johns, that's what I took umbrage with. I didn't see it as a win for Johns at all. And again, I picked Johns to win the fight, and I thought Vince Morales did enough. And for Morales, it's huge. You're 11-7 now. You're on a 2-fight losing streak. He's in the same category. We talked about it earlier on your show, just like a Sung Woo Choi. Now all of a sudden you have a really salty record, and you're not a young man in this division, it really is tough to try and build back. I thought Morales had a ton of promise on the 2-fight win streak before he fought Martinez. I didn't think he would beat Martinez, but he made a decent account of himself. And then in this fight, he kind of played the outside game, landed some decent shots. You look at the damage after the fight. Johns is, bloodied up around his nose and his mouth. I didn't think Johns won the fight. And again, judging is what it is. But a 30-27 Johns was a bad scorecard.
Another thing came out of this fight, before we the show, you try to keep it around the hour, but we're at the hour mark now. You know what I mean? So I wanted to discuss this before we end the show. This Bodell, you asked the question, can Della Maddalena hang with the top 10 at 170? We talked about that earlier in the show, so just rewind it and go back to it. But yeah, coming out of the Miles Johns thing, that decision in the post fight, he talked about his new team that he's with, Glory MMA, and his head coach. And he said he couldn't be in the corner because he was suspended by the UFC. Now, this goes back to a couple weeks when Derek Minner fought, and then the line. I think, Craig, you probably know more of like what exactly happened with the line shift and all of that. Could you kind of give us some background on that before we talk about the suspension?
There was some tweets that came out that the line dropped like really quick right before the fight, and then Minner came out through those 2 kicks, and he looked like he was seriously compromised. And then the fight was over, and Nurmagomedov was the winner. So, yeah, it was definitely kind of head scratching after that fight as to what was going on. And then a day or 2 later, it looked like there was going to be an investigation into the fight because of that line movement.
And then, the articles came out, like you said, investigation is happening. And maybe last week, Dana White was asked about that situation. He said, "Oh no, there's nothing going on. They're looking into it. I don't think there's any problems." And then James Krause is suspended by the UFC, and that's clear as day because Miles Johns just told us in the post-fight interview. And now there's the speculation, right? Because when you go on Twitter FBI, right? There's a lot of investigative reporters on Twitter, right? There's a lot of CSI wannabes on Twitter, and they were like putting up the whole what is it? I don't know if it's his Patreon or his, what is it? What are those things called? Where he helps people with betting, and then they're saying that there was some funniness going on there. I don't want to I don't want to like infer too much, but what do you think about this whole situation? Because you're in the gambling world, you're in the picks world.
Yeah, like that's the thing. Like, we make the picks, we make our videos, we do our show before the fights, and that's pretty much that. So we don't really go too far into the weeds. Like, you don't have to pay to watch our content or anything. It's just there, and if you like it, you like it. And we pick who we think is going to win. But yeah, it really is weird when you have a coach in that position, and it's definitely not a good look after that Minner fight, especially if you have a YouTube channel like that. But I don't really know what to think of it. I want to know more as to what happened the day before the fight. Like Miles Johns kind of inferred, like how your coach just gets pulled. Like you would have been in Vegas, what, Wednesday, I would think?
Yeah.
Tuesday, Wednesday. So it's kind of weird that, they were able to be together, assuming the coach and fighter were both there. And then just a day before the fight, nope, we got to pull you. So I'm eager to see if there's anything more that comes out of it, if Dana White kind of offers a little bit of insight into it, because you're definitely at a giant disadvantage if your head coach is in your corner after you just switch camps. So, regardless of the result, again, I thought Morales won the fight. But, yeah, really odd. And I wonder if out of all of this, does John stay with the camp, or does he end up just kind of going back to Fortis and sticking with Safe Sood?
I doubt he goes back to Fortis. I doubt that. I really, just from what I've seen behind the scenes, I doubt he goes back to Fortis. Yeah, with that, like you mentioned, the fighter gets there on Tuesday. The coaches get there either on Tuesday with them, maybe Wednesday. Was he interviewed by somebody in Vegas, and then they decided to pull him? Like I'm kind of interested to how that all escalated into him getting pulled and suspended while he was there, not like before he flew out, because they would have known that he's going to fly out, right? They would have known that he's going to step on that plane because his name would be on the ticket. UFC usually take care of those things, right? So it's very, very interesting how they release the information about what exactly is happening. Because if he's pulled, suspended, like how long is he suspended? And he has so many fighters that fight in the UFC.
That's what I was gonna say. Like they have a big roster of fighters, and it continues to get bigger. And you look at the fighters that, like a Brandon Moreno. Like what happens when Brandon Moreno has to fight Figueiredo again? Does he not have his head coach in his corner? So, yeah, it's a really weird circumstance. Like we haven't really seen anything like this before.
No, and there's been maybe one incident in the UFC, like with fight fixing. So I don't know. We're not saying that this is fight fixing, but there was a fight fixing situation. It never happened, but the UFC was notified of some line changes, some big money coming in. It was in Korea. It was Bang versus Coons,
right?
Yeah, it was Leo Coons versus Taeyong Bang, and there was all this money coming in on Leo Coons. And the line shifted tremendously. And then the UFC went to both fighters and asked them if there's any, what would the fighters say? They would admit to it? No, they wouldn't admit to it. But later on, when the investigation happened, Bang told the police that somebody came, gave him money, and then they put a whole bunch of money on Leon Coons because they told him to lose. He tried to lose, but not. He tried to lose, but he didn't lose. He won a split decision. And then he went to jail for a year. And then the people that, offered him the money also went to jail for a year. He's in these are people that are not even involved in the coaching or in teams or anything like that. But this time it's the coach, right? And what was it? A few weeks back, the UFC put out a notice to fighters and coaches about gambling on fights as well. And it all like escalated, and all these speculations came up about fighters and coaches and, people that have gambling shows and pick shows that are actually involved in the sport. Like you and me, we have no involvement in the sport. Like, we're spectators, right? That I cover the sport, you analyze the sport, right? And you make picks, and I'll make picks sometimes as well. But we have no say. We have no like insider information deep inside camps, and we have no way to manipulate anything, right? So we would never be investigated. Like
no, it's a really, really weird situation that way. And like again, like try and think of fighters that are out of that camp that are going to fight soon. Like if I click on John's on Tapology, it's probably too soon. Yeah, they still have an affiliation for Fortis MMA, so I can't click on it to see fighters that are out of Glory. I don't think there was anybody else on that card that was from that camp either. But again, like Moreno or like Jeff Molina the next time he fights or somebody, like are they going to be allowed to have their head coach? Because like you talk about Fortis, you look at fighters that were on this card that actually did fight out of Fortis. So you had at the top Kennedy. Think about Kennedy's fights. Saif Saud is in his year, like shouting. If Kennedy doesn't come out of first gear in the first round, Saif is shouting. He's shouting through the whole first round, the whole second round, the whole third round if we get there. Like it definitely means a lot for that fighter, and you can see that it means a lot. They're like Krause, when he corners a lot of his fighters, he throws out really useful information, and he's usually the louder of the two coaches that are in there, unless it is Glory against Fortis or somebody that really hoops and hollers. So you definitely have to think he means a lot to his fighters. And if you can't have him in your corner, I mean, maybe for Miles Johns, it was shouting out combinations, and he just wasn't able to get activated early to throw his combinations. So it took him a while to settle into the fight. And then after that, it was instinct. So an odd situation, and eager to see how it plays itself out.
Yeah, you got Derek Minner, who is involved in this somehow in a weird way. Maybe he wasn't involved at all. It's weird because I interviewed Derek Minner ahead of that fight, and I asked him about the whole like UFC gambling fighter, banning gambling for fighters and coaches, and he says, "How are they going to do that?" Like he said that. He's like, "How are they going to do that? Like, how are they going to control that?" And and fighters are the worst people to get picks from because they're only going to pick their friends. That's what happens.
Well, and the craziest part about it is I watched your interview getting ready for that fight. And the thing that kind of weirded me out was, okay, well, he lost like what? Was it 6 weeks or 8 weeks out of his camp because of concussion issues? So I thought, ooh, well, that's not good, but he still had a really long camp. So you'd think he'd be dialed in and ready to go. And then first kick, major injury. So it seemed. So not good for
that was risky.
him. Yeah, and he's on a losing streak himself now.
Yeah, he's 3 fights, and you got Brandon Moreno. He's gonna fight on January 21st. That's coming up real quick. You got Tim Elliott, Trey Ogden. These are just UFC guys. Jeff Molina, who's fighting on January 14th. David Oyama fighting on January 14th. You got Mana Martinez. I think Mike Breeden might be still with the UFC. Man, you got a pretty long list. Isaac Dugarian fighting on January 14th. Man, it's very, you gotta follow this closely. Don't make presumptions of like what's gonna happen, but I think this is something that's gonna set precedents moving forward, right? It's something that we need to watch. It's not gonna affect us at all, but it's something, a part of MMA history that we're gonna probably be talking about in years to come.
Yeah.
All right, that's it, man. Craig, appreciate you coming on, man. Everybody, make sure you go download the AllStar app in the descriptions for everything, for picks, for profiles, for events, for interviews, for news. Go to the Fight Night Picks YouTube channel and go subscribe. Craig, he does a great job with his brother Matt and the team over there representing Canada. You never can go wrong with Canada, man. Some of the best people in the sport that are involved in the sport are from Canada. Craig, anything you want to plug, or if you want to say before we head out?
I got nothing to plug, but the fight before the Miles Johns Vince Morales fight. Listen, do yourself a favor, go watch a Ricky Tercios fight, and go listen to some post-fight and some interview stuff from Ricky Tercios. I mean, that guy is a walking soundbite, and he's always positive, always. So go listen to that guy.